At number 5. Nvidia GeForce RTX 2060.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is the RTX 2060. It just launched right when you're watching this, if you're watching this on the day of upload. And it's from Nvidia, of course. It's their new RTX 2060. I already said that. We're going to test it, and we're going to compare it against other cards to see if it's any good, and if you should buy one. So, what's going on with this thing, man? It's like supposed to be $349 according to Nvidia, which is probably not true. It's probably going to be more than that. We'll talk about that later. It's featuring the same TU106 GPU that's found in the RTX 2070, but of course it's been nerfed. It's been nerfed a bit, so not as many CUDA cores, not as many SMs, and so forth. It does support, however, just like the RTX 2070, ray tracing and DLSS and other technologies that you can't really use all that much right now, but you might be able to use them in the near future or in the far future. We don't know. It's just one of those things, you don't know. There's some specs on this thing. Like I said, it's got slightly fewer CUDA cores than the RTX 2070 at 1920 versus the 2070's 2304. It's got a few less RTX ops and one less gig array, so you know how that goes. Boost clock is 1680 megahertz versus the RTX 2070's 1710. Bear in mind that this is a Founders Edition card, so it is factory overclocked. As you can see, this card only has a 6 gig frame buffer of GDDR6, and that's 2 less gigs than all the other cards on this chart right here. But unlike the GTX 10 series cards, it is GDDR5, it's GDDR6 memory instead of GDDR5 memory. So it's only got 6 gigs, but it's GDDR6, whereas the 10 series only had GDDR5, and it's faster memory too, rated at 14 gigabits per second as opposed to 8 gigabits per second with the 10 series 1070 and 1070 Ti. It's the same speed as the RTX 2070 in that sense. It also has more memory bandwidth than the 1070 and the 1070 Ti, but a more narrow bus width of 192-bit as opposed to 256-bit on those 10 series cards. As far as thermal design power goes, this is a 160 watt TDP card. Let's talk about the card itself. Founders Edition card. It's the same, similar cooler. It's shorter though, but it's good. It can fit in probably like smaller form factor cases, I'm sure, especially because those are accommodating longer and longer GPUs these days. Dual fan design. It's got a single 8-pin. I lied. 8-pin connector on the side, so it's on the side now. You can see that? That's different. Backplate's still there. Rear I/O is the same. You get 2 DisplayPort, 1 HDMI, USB Type-C for virtual link, and a dual link DVI port. No NVLink SLI bridge or finger here, so you can't put 2 of these together at the same time. Obviously, why would you do that anyway? All right. So over it. I tested 5 different games, 1920 by 1080 and 2560 by 1440. I ran all the benchmarks for this card in my 9900K test bed. That CPU was overclocked to 5 gigahertz, 16 gigs of, I mean, you can read, right? I tested it against 2 different cards, including the Asus Cerberus GTX 1070 Ti and a Galix Sniper GTX 1070. I didn't test it against the GTX 1080 because, all these cards were run stock at their out-of-the-box frequencies, but bear in mind all 3 cards do come factory overclocked, so there's that. And let's just see how they did. You can see here that the GTX 1070 Ti performed about 7.2% better on average than the GTX 1070, and the RTX 2060 performed ever so slightly less than that, 6.9% better. So the 2060 and the 1070 Ti were very close, neck and neck. Obviously the 1070 Ti edges it out ever so slightly here. That could be chalked up to margin of error, but.
At number 4, Nvidia GeForce RTX 2070.
time goes on. But let's quickly go over the specs of these three cards, starting with the RTX 2070, which is of course the successor to the GTX 1070. It's got 2304 CUDA cores, a base clock of 1410 megahertz, a boost of 1710. Asterisks here because the new Founders Edition cards are gonna come factory overclocked. So you might potentially see the FE version of the card perform faster than some of the base models that are released from add-in board partners. And you've also got 8 gigs of GDDR6 memory with a memory speed of 14 gigabits per second on a 256-bit bus, 448 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth with a 6-phase power supply, 175 watt TDP, one 8-pin power connector, and it's going to retail for $599 US. $599, that's the price for the Founders Edition card, which there will be a premium on. Non-Founders Edition cards are going to start at $499. We'll just have to wait and see if those prices actually hold up when these cards are announced or released. There's also no release date yet for the RTX 20.
At number 3, AMD Radeon VII.
Fairly well known at this point that this is the world's first 7nm gaming GPU. Very exciting. Turing with GeForce is 12nm, so we're gonna pop the lid off of this bad boy. Hey, simple and clean. I like it. You got a card and a plastic thing. What is this? Looks like a stand. Ooh, look at it. They got the GPU right there. That's a big sucker. Ooh, what is this? Candy? No, these are batteries. Oh, I see. These probably go in here. I doubt that they power the GPU. I'm sure it needs a bit more juice than that. Let's take the card out first and then we'll mess around with this business. Scooch aside here. Now this GPU, I'm gonna try to do this one-handed while filming. It features 60 compute units. Oh, this is gonna be a challenge. 60 compute units, 3,840 shader units. Oh my God. Professional unboxer here. So that's actually fewer units overall than its predecessor, the RX Vega 64. However, we are packing double the frame buffer with 16 gigs of HBM2 memory on a 4096-bit bus, giving us a terabyte of memory bandwidth. And that 7nm architecture has really done AMD some favors when it comes to clocking this thing. Out of the box, we're gonna see peak frequencies of 1800 megahertz. That's about 300 megahertz higher than we saw with the RX Vega 64. And of course, the architecture isn't just about raw power, it's also about power efficiency. So at 300 megahertz faster than an RX Vega 64, it's still drawing around the same amount of power, which is pretty impressive. Now, this card doesn't have any RT cores on it like the Turing cards do, but AMD has said that it can handle ray tracing workloads just fine, and in some cases, even outperform its Turing rivals, in particular ray tracing workloads. There's also no crossfire support for this card. It's a bit of a lone wolf in that sense, which is fine by me. I mean, I would imagine that getting 32 gigs of HBM2 memory to work nicely together would be a waking nightmare, and plus I usually suggest people go with a single faster card anyway as opposed to doing a multi-GPU setup for reliability, stability, and performance. Taking a closer look at the card, you've still got your tried and true PCIe Gen 3 here, and it looks like a very sort of simplified and minimalistic design here. It's like they took a piece of sheet metal, bent it a couple times, cut out a couple holes, and bam, there's your reference design GPU. You got 3 fans. They look to be about 92 millimeters or so, and the heatsink. This portion of the heatsink is actually much taller than the portion you're seeing underneath the fans. So it does provide a little extra heat dissipation. You can see that there's a copper plate right there, and it's a fairly open shroud. Nothing's getting ejected out the front, if you want to call this the front of the GPU, but certainly air is going to be exhausted out the bottom, the top to some degree, and certainly the back. So be sure to plan your airflow path accordingly should you be popping one of these into a future build. While we're at the rear here, woohoo, let's take a look at our I/O. We've got 1 HDMI and 3 display ports. Radeon branding, of course. This is very similar to the RX Vega 64. This probably lights up red. Not expecting any RGB here. We've also got that Radeon cube in the corner that I'm sure lights up too. Just above that, dual 8-pin power plugs. Again, 295 watt TDP. I'm very curious to see exactly how much power this will draw from the wall though. And of course, I can't talk about that right now. The backplate looks very nice. Kind of the same sort of color machining as the front. All very uniform. I wonder if this adds any sort of thermal dissipation. It definitely has a lot of slots for ventilation, but looks like it's fairly close to the PCB there. Yeah, it's like right on it. I'd be curious to tear this thing apart and check to see if there's any thermal pad situation or if this is actually being used as a heatsink of some sort. The card's not super tall or anything. Maybe extends 3/4 of an inch over the L shape of the PCI bracket there, and it measures about 12 inches long. That's 305 millimeters for those of you who live in a place where things make sense. I've been feeling it this whole video, but I haven't pointed it out till now. This card is very heavy. I mean, between the backplate and the full-length heatsink, just the shroud itself being all metal, this thing is a friggin' brick. This might be a good card to vertical mount, honestly, assuming that you can get it far away enough from the side panel. Okay, it's time to bust this thing out. Oh my god, it's heavy. Oh my lumbago. First things first, you put the batteries in. These crappy batteries. Give me a sec. So this has now become a battery unboxing video. These are AAAs. Comes in a pack of 3. Get in the thing. Can I just have one day without problems? Is that too much to ask? Yes. Batteries installed. Okay, GPU. I don't know how this goes. Probably like that. Does that look right? Sure. And there's a power switch back here somewhere. Aha! Oh! Doesn't really illuminate all that well. Kind of a weak RGB implementation. Let's see if it looks better with the lights off. Okay, it's definitely a bit more noticeable now. That's a pretty nice display. All right, let me just set this up here. We'll do a little talkie-talkie. Okay, I look really short right now because I had to lower my chair so that my head doesn't get cut off. I really need a haircut. Getting sidetracked here. Like I mentioned, this card has to stay competitive performance-wise with an RTX 2080 in order for people to give a crap about it. Otherwise, what's the point? You're not gonna pay more money for less performance. That's if you're strictly talking from a gaming perspective. If you're looking into doing some ray tracing workloads from a professional standpoint, then maybe the 16 gigs of onboard HBM2 memory is enough. That's the beauty of this card, is it's sort of flexible, kind of versatile, might be good for someone who likes to work and play, whereas the RTX 2080 is strictly marketed towards a gaming audience. Now, hypothetically, if I was in the market for a new high-end GPU and I had $700 to drop on one, just willy-nilly, personally, I would be looking strictly at raw gaming performance in terms of frame rates, 1% lows, 0.1% lows, and that sort of thing. For gaming in 2019, 16 gigs of VRAM is absolutely insane. It's more than anyone could possibly utilize. And you know, it's nice to have, but you don't necessarily need it. So I think for gamers in particular, it's gonna boil down to how fast this is compared to an RTX 2080, especially now that you get FreeSync support with 10 series cards and newer on the GeForce side. It's one less argument for high-end AMD GPUs like this. You can't just say, well, you might save $200, $300 on a FreeSync panel instead of having to go with G-Sync. Well, that's not the case anymore. So this thing really does have to have the performance to back up the price in relation to the competition, and I really hope it knocks it out of the park. You guys let me know what your anticipations are, or your expectations are, sorry, and what you think of this card so far. If you're hoping that it succeeds, if you are an Nvidia fanboy and you hate competition and you can't wait to see it fail, let me know down below. Guys, thanks for watching this quick and dirty video. As always, toss a like on it if you enjoyed it, and get subscribed for more tech stuff coming at you really soon. I'm actually going to drop this on the test bed right meow, so I must stop recording or I will get in lots of trouble and I will never get anything like this from AMD ever again. Okay, I'm rambling now. Have a good day.
At number 2, Nvidia GeForce RTX 2080.
Move on to the next card, which is the RTX 2080, successor to the GTX 1080. This is again specs for the Founders Edition card, 2944 CUDA cores, a base of 1515 megahertz, a boost clock of 1800 megahertz with 8 gigs of GDDR6 memory with a speed of 14 gigabits per second on a 256-bit bus, 448 gigabits per second memory bandwidth, an 8-phase power supply, a 225-watt TDP, a single 6-pin and single 8-pin power connector with a price of $799, and non-Founders Edition cards will go for $699. September 20th is when this card officially launches. Pre-orders are available now, however.
At number 1, Nvidia GeForce RTX 2080 Ti.
And finally, we have the big boy, the RTX 2080 Ti Founders Edition at 4352 CUDA cores, a base clock of 1350 megahertz, a boost of 1635 megahertz, 11 gigs of GDDR6 with a memory speed of 14 gigabits per second on a 352-bit bus, 616 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth, a 13-phase power supply, 260-watt TDP, 2 8-pin power connectors, with a price of, you might want to sit down for this one, $1,199. Non-Founders Edition cards will run you for a cool grand. This launches on the same date as the RTX 2080 on September 20th. I believe pre-orders are also available for that card. Now, some quick thoughts on this. These are definitely the highest prices that we've seen from Nvidia for the cards belonging to these tiers. So hopefully the performance of these cards will scale with respect to the prices. And then finally, this is the first time that I can recall the Ti model being unveiled and released on the same date as the XX80 SKU. Generally, the Ti model has come, weeks or even months well after the 80 SKU, but this time they're coming together. Now, switching gears here, we can sort of discuss the new Founders Edition cooler, the whole cooling solution, the card itself. Most of the B-roll that you see from here on out is going to be of the RTX 2080 Ti. So just bear in mind that that cooler is slightly different than the RTX 1070. It's more or less identical to the 2080, but just bear in mind that these images are going to be mostly of the RTX 2080 Ti. First of all, this is a completely redesigned card from the last generation, as I mentioned before. They've kind of ditched the aggressive tessellated look of the last gen for a more sleek and minimal aesthetic. Of course, everyone's going to have an opinion about this. You guys feel free to drop yours in the comments. They've also done away with the blower style fan in place of dual axial 13 blade fans. Not exactly sure how big they are. They look about 100 millimeters, I could be wrong, but this definitely makes the card look more like an add-in board partner card as opposed to the traditional FE shrouds we're used to. The fans are allegedly much quieter than a blower style fan, which makes sense, just because they're much larger. They don't have to spin it as high of RPM, and there's two of them, and they have like a fancy blade design or whatever. So all those things combined, I would imagine, is going to make for a more comfortable gaming experience. Now, there's a silver shroud that's kind of hugging the outer edges of both of the fans. I believe it's made of aluminum. I couldn't confirm that, but it definitely looks to be made of that material or something similar. And then there's this rather plain black surface in between the fans, which is my least favorite part of the card cosmetically. It just looks a little bit too plain and boring. You'll also notice that this black area is much larger on the RTX 2080 and the RTX 2080 Ti than it is on the RTX 2070. You can tell because the margins around the branded lettering is spaced very differently. And that's because the 2080 and 2080 Ti's are actually about 1.5 inches longer than the RTX 2070 at 10.5 inches and 9 inches respectively. The two faster cards are also slightly taller than the RTX 2070 at 4.556 inches versus 4.435 inches. You still get the green LED backlit branding on the side of the card, but now it says RTX instead of GTX to reflect the new names. And it's not RGB. Who knew? I'm sure a lot of people are super disappointed that it's not RGB, but who cares? It's also an open shroud card now. So previous generations had, the typical blower fan, and it was an enclosed card ejecting all the hot air out the back of the card. Now it's being ejected from both the sides and also the back. Basically, these new FE cards will be exhausting hot air inside of your case. I think that definitely changes things. I've seen a lot of people, including myself, use the older Founders Edition cards inside of small form factor cases where getting heat trapped inside of a little space can be really detrimental to your thermals and your performance. But people might have to look elsewhere and check out some add-in board partner models that feature an enclosed shroud to sort of accommodate those scenarios. So it's quite interesting. You guys also let me know what you think of all this stuff. Additionally, we've got an SLI finger that's in the same position, it's in the same spot, but it's been redesigned. Looks kind of different here, unless I'm just not seeing it from the right angle, but it's been redesigned with support for NVLink. So it's going to be delivering 50 times the transfer bandwidth of previous technologies, and the high bandwidth SLI bridge seems to have also received a makeover. The top of the card gets the old backplate treatment, but you can see here it swaps the usual black color for silver, which again, I believe is aluminum. And this backplate is unique in a sense where it actually extends to wrap around the edges of the card where it eventually meets the fans, like I mentioned earlier. This creates sort of a unibody look, which I think is a refreshing change, but you guys let me know. Finally, on the back of the card, we get 3 DisplayPort 1.4 ports, meaning we can finally do 4K at 120 hertz, and probably well ahead of its time still is 8K 60 hertz support, but I'm sure Linus will put 55 of them together and play Minesweeper on it at some point. We also get a single HDMI 2.0B and 1 USB Type-C port for Virtual Link, which is the new open industry standard that's currently being developed to meet the power, display, and bandwidth demands for next-gen VR headsets. This is really cool because you no longer have to eat up one of your video outputs to play VR. If you have like a 4-panel setup or whatever, triple display with a companion monitor, you don't have to unplug one of those if you want to plug in your VR headset or whatever it is. So that's actually pretty cool. So that is the new Founders Edition card for this first wave of 20 series Turing GPUs. What do you guys think? Love it? Hate it? somewhere in between? Let me know. Also share your thoughts on those prices. What kind of performance are you expecting now that the official pricing and specs are out on the table? That's all I got for now, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Toss a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and get subscribed for more tech content on the way, including more coverage of this new family of GPUs. Very exciting stuff. Have a good one, y'all. I'll see you in the next video.